Welcome. Welcome to AI Horror Stories. Are you a fan of chilling tales? Then you've come to the right place. Today, we have 3 stories that will send shivers down your spine. First story, The Ghost of the Factory. A child plays with a ghostly girl who pushes them into a dangerous water tank, and it's revealed that the girl is the factory owner's deceased daughter. This story creates tension between innocent play and a terrifying secret. Second story, Voices in the Fog. A teacher enters a mysterious fog-shrouded village and hears the whispers of lost souls. The story blends curiosity and mystery, exploring a world that blurs the line between the living and the dead. Third story, The Midnight Reflection. A photographer captures the apparition of a ghostly lighthouse keeper in an abandoned lighthouse, appearing in the water's reflection on full moon nights. This story establishes an intriguing connection between the supernatural and the visible through mysterious photographs and the search for a lost soul. So what are you waiting for? Fasten your seatbelts and prepare for a thrilling journey into fear. And yes, if you enjoy these stories, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, AI Horror Stories, and like the video. 1. The Ghost of the Factory. I have all this in mind even though it happened to me a long time ago. I think I was about 8 or 9 years old. At that time, I didn't understand why people got scared when I told them this story and my mother asked me to stop. Do it. And when I was growing up, I understood why he had asked me. Now I think of it as an experience, one of those that is never forgotten. My mother worked at that time as a seamstress in a tennis factory that was by the Palacio de los Deportes. Here in Mexico City, it was his afternoon shift, and when there was a lot of work, Don Mario, who was in charge, asked him to stay a few more hours. It was her turn to sew the tongues and uppers of the sneakers. My mother really liked that extra money, so she almost never said no. But there were times when she had no one to leave me at home with, and so she would bring me with her to work. We almost always left at 9, but on those occasions of overtime, we would leave the factory at 11 or 12 at night. To me, yes, I really liked being with her, because after finishing my homework, I could start playing and running like crazy everywhere. It was a huge factory, with long rows of sewing machines. It had a very high tin roof. At the entrance, there were 2 rooms that looked like offices, and to the bottom of all the sewing machines, past the cutting area, there was like a very large and deep hole in the floor where they poured all the tearing up of the fabrics that were no longer in use. That was my favorite place, because I liked to be jumping as if it were a pool on the pieces of foam rubber. One day while I was playing there, I heard a girl behind me who asked me if I wanted to play with her. I turned around and looked at her. She was about my age. She was wearing a dress and very clean white shoes, and her hair was tied back. It didn't seem strange to me to see her there. Some of my mother's colleagues who worked this shift brought their children too. What did seem a little strange to me is that her face was very pale and she spoke very seriously, as if she were a big person, but the truth is that at that age you don't care about that at all, so I said yes, so he told me to. Let's play tag, and without telling me more, she started running along the main corridor of the factory, while shouting that I was bringing them. I ran after her along the corridor, but no matter how much I ran, I lost sight of her. I didn't stop until I reached the first row of machines, where my mother was working. Seeing me all agitated, she asked me what I was doing. I told her I was playing tag with a friend. She looked up from the machine sewing for a moment and looked at me strangely, but immediately returned it to the needle that had lost the thread. Sometime later, I understood why she looked at me like that, since we were the only ones who were in the factory at that time, because none of her colleagues had stayed overtime, so I went back down the hallway. My mother, he managed to shout that we were just leaving. I didn't pay much attention to him, and as I walked, I checked each row of machines looking for the girl. I thought she had already left. I turned around ready to go back to my mother, but it was. Then when I heard her voice behind me again, it scared me. I turned around as fast as I could, and there was the girl, at the end of the hallway where I had been playing and I had found her the first time. I stayed all confused. How had she managed to return so quickly down the same hallway without me seeing her? And then she told me again, "You bring them," with that serious face. I started running back along the she walked down the hallway as fast as she could without stopping to see her. This time she wouldn't deceive me or run away. But the girl didn't seem to have the intention of moving. She just stared at me. And when she was already very nearby, I jumped on her to grab her. When I stretched out my arm to touch her, it was as if the was going through her, and I fell on my belly on the floor. I got up very quickly. The girl started walking towards me with very slow steps. I started walking backwards, terrified. She only repeated, "You bring them," but her voice sounded very thick and her face seemed very angry, as if it were going to explode at any moment. Then I began to scream desperately at my mother. But since I was facing away, I didn't realize that the lid of the cistern was open. I took the step and fell. Inside, the water was freezing. I didn't know swim, and I started kicking to try to push myself up. Trying to grab the frame of the lid, I couldn't. There she was. I could see her white shoes on the shore. She was already swallowing a lot of water and couldn't breathe. Terrified, I felt how I was slowly sinking under the water. I could still see the deformed silhouette of the girl. At that moment, I lost consciousness. When I opened my eyes, everything was blurry. The first thing I did was vomit a lot of water and cough. Next to me was Don Mario, and my mother, who was crying a lot, was outside the cistern. Don Mario picked me up and took me to his office. Inside, my mother told him he helped me lie down on one of the armchairs in the waiting room. No one said anything, but I saw the fear and anguish in their eyes. My mother sat next to me and hugged me, while Don Mario was looking for something on one of his shelves, until he finally grabbed a large piece of cloth and gave it to my mom to dry. Then, he sat down at his desk, grabbed one of his phones, and started dialing to the factory doctor. My mother straightened me on the chair to take off my wet shirt and pants and dry me well with the piece of cloth. Then she wrapped it around me while she squeezed my clothes well. Don Mario came out a couple of times from the office. One of those he returned with other pants and a t-shirt. He gave them to my mother to put them on. Just then the doorbell rang in the hallway and Don Mario came out. In a hurry to open the door, my mother picked me up and put me on the desk. That was when I saw that photograph. It was the girl I was playing with and the one who threw me into the cistern. She was hugging Don Mario. My mother grabbed me the portrait. I didn't have to ask. He looked at her very sadly and told me that she was Don Mario's youngest daughter, that she was his adoration, and he left. The photo again on the desk. At that moment he entered Don Mario with the doctor, examined me from head to toe and told them that I was fine, that apparently I had not swallowed so much water and that there were no other problems, but that it would be good if they took me to the hospital to an evaluation. As soon as the doctor said goodbye, Don Mario told my mother that another checkup would be good. He carried me to his car and took us to the hospital. From that day my mother stopped taking me to the factory. I took care of it with my aunt or sometimes with the neighbor. A few months later she quit. At that moment when all this happened, my mother never told me anything about what had happened. Spent there, but now older, on a occasion when we were talking about the factory, he told me that on the day of Don Mario's daughter's first communion, he had had to go to the factory because of an unfinished business, and that his daughter had become infatuated with accompanying him. So Don Mario had gone into his office and his daughter started playing among the aisles of the sewing machines, and that when he went out to look for her to return to, I couldn't find her at home. He checked every corner until finally found her drowned in the same cistern in which I fell. It was a very hard blow for Don Mario that affected him greatly. Sometime later he would divorce and dedicate himself completely to work. On that occasion I took the opportunity to ask my mother why she had given up continuing to work in the factory if Don Mario was a good person, and she told me that from the day I almost drowned in the cistern, every subsequent night and until the last day he was there, a girl in a white dress and shoes appeared at the end of the hallway. Voices in the fog. In the village of Elderwood, surrounded by a thick forest and perpetually shrouded in fog, a story was told that had been passed down from generation to generation. They said that, on nights when the fog became so dense that you could barely see a few meters away, voices could be heard whispering in the trees. These voices belonged to the apparitions of those who once inhabited the village and who, for unknown reasons, could not find eternal rest. Cecilia, a young teacher recently arrived in Elderwood, was intrigued by this legend from the first moment when he heard it. With an adventurous spirit and insatiable curiosity, she decided to enter the forest one night, guided by the light of her flashlight and the desire to discover the truth behind the whispers. As he advanced, the fog grew thicker, and the light of his flashlight barely managed to pierce the darkness. Then she began to hear them, voices that seemed to call to her, whispering words she couldn't fully understand. Cecilia followed the voices, feeling a mixture of fear and fascination. Suddenly, before her, ethereal figures appeared, barely visible through the fog. They were the apparitions of the former inhabitants of Elderwood, dressed in clothes from another era. Although Cecilia was startled at first, She soon realized that the apparitions had no intention of harming her. They seemed as lost and confused as she felt watching them. One of the apparitions, a kind-looking woman, came closer than the others. Through fragments of whispers, Cecilia understood that they were looking for someone who could listen to their stories, who could remember them and, in some way, help them find the peace they longed for. Cecilia he spent several hours in the forest, listening to the stories of the apparitions. Lost loves, regrets, joys, and sadness of a past life. At dawn, as the fog began to dissipate, the apparitions faded away one by one, leaving Cecilia alone in the forest, but with a feeling of calm and understanding. He returned to the village with a new mission. Cecilia began documenting all the stories she had heard, compiling her memories of the apparitions into a book. Over time, this book became a treasure for the inhabitants of Elderwood, a bridge between the past and the present, between the living and those spirits who still dwelt in the forest. The fog never stopped being a mystery in Elderwood, but for Cecilia and many others, it became a reminder that sometimes listening is the key to helping lost souls find their way to the light. 3. The Midnight Reflection. In the small coastal town of Marrow Bay, a legend was woven among the waves and the mist, that of an abandoned lighthouse whose lighthouse keeper, it was said, had disappeared one night without a trace. It was said that, every night of the full moon, his spirit returned, manifesting in the reflection of the lighthouse on the calm waters, searching for something or someone he never found. Liam, a young photographer with an interest in the supernatural, was drawn to buy this story and decided to investigate the phenomenon. Armed with his camera and a flashlight, he headed to the lighthouse one night with a full moon, hoping to capture some evidence of the apparition. The lighthouse, an imposing and solitary structure, it stood defiantly before the onslaught of the sea. Liam explored the place, feeling how history and mystery permeated every corner. As the night progressed, he positioned himself on the shore in front of the lighthouse, his camera ready to capture the phenomenon. When the moon reached its highest point, something extraordinary happened. The reflection of the lighthouse in the sea began to shine brightly, and in it, Liam could see not only the structure of the lighthouse, but also the figure of a man, the missing lighthouse keeper, standing next to the light. The spirit seemed to be looking towards the coast, directly where Liam was. Moved by a mixture of fear and fascination, Liam took as many photos as he could. The apparition did not seem threatening. Rather, there was a deep sadness in her, a palpable longing. Liam, driven by a desire to help, approached the water, extending his hand towards the reflection, although he knew it was impossible to touch something that was nothing more than an image on the waves. At that moment, the reflection faded, and the night regained its calm. Liam stood there, looking out to sea, wondering about the lighthouse keeper's story and what he had wanted to communicate. Looking through the photos on his camera, Liam found clear images of the apparition, captures that went beyond the rational explanation. He decided to share his experience and the photos with the inhabitants of Marrow Bay, rekindling interest in the legend of the lighthouse and its mysterious lighthouse keeper. Over time, Liam's story and the photos of the appearance they became part of local legend. The people of Marrow Bay began to see the lighthouse not as a place of fear, but as a reminder of the untold stories that exist on the edge between our world and the afterlife. And although Liam continued his search for the supernatural elsewhere, he never forgot the night he came face to face with the midnight reflection, an experience that changed his perception of life, death, and the mysteries that lie between they.